All right, we continue right here on Sports Radio 810 WHB. Jason Anderson with you. We head up until 2 o'clock. Chiefs players reporting and Dennis Dodd reporting on realignment that's been going on hot and heavy. Less than a week now, but it feels like it's, been a decade, I guess. Dennis Dodd, CBS Sports. Dennis, welcome into the show. How are you, sir?
I am good, Jason. How are you?
I am doing just fine. Do we know what the latest is right now on realignment, Oklahoma and Texas? Is it still sometime today we think that things are going to get, that the Big 12 is going to get notified?
The reports are today. I think the original report said within 2 weeks, and then was a week, and then I and others reported Saturday it was going to be within 24 to 48 hours that Texas and Oklahoma were going to at least serve notice to the Big 12 that they intend to leave. Now, we had this report that Big 12 officials met with Texas OU. I don't know how that turned out at the moment. What I suspect is that's, again, another desperation thing over the weekend. I reported that the Big 12 was considering awarding Texas and Oklahoma a share and a half each, and then taking that money from their shares as an enticement to stay. But again, I think that was a Hail Mary.
Yeah, I guess my next question would be, since they met with Texas and Oklahoma and the extra revenue was maybe a part of that conversation or a part of the Big 12 ADs and Presidents conference call last week, you mentioned a Hail Mary. Is there anything that the Big 12 could do to salvage this and to keep Texas and Oklahoma in the Big 12?
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm not saying it's right. I just think Texas and Oklahoma have gone so far down this road that they are committed to the SEC. The big question no one will answer is when. The grant of rights that the Big 12 has that keeps the television rights within the conference until this current contract ends is pretty ironclad. And that sets up a whole new story. Can you imagine these two teams playing in the Big 12 for the next 4 years? I can't quite remember. Nebraska had that lame duck year in 11, I think it was, and there was an incident with Texas A&M or at Texas A&M when they played there, when Bo Pelini was coaching. It could get really, really ugly.
Feels like co-parenting roommates until the kids graduate high school.
A bad divorce. Yes.
Yeah. Let's wait till the kids graduate, and then we'll go our separate ways. I mean, it's going to be weird. It's going to be odd, and it's you mentioned awkward at times. This doesn't feel, when you said that it doesn't feel like there's anything that the Big 12 could do, and I'm in agreement with you. This doesn't have the feel of a negotiation ploy. It doesn't have the feel of, hey, Texas, hey, Oklahoma, how can we get a little more money out of the Big 12? If that was the case, I feel like the Big 12 would have been notified or at least have an idea that they were talking to the SEC before it got to this point. If it's true that it's been going on since late December, early January, that when it gets to this point, there is really a point of no return. There's no reconciliation here.
Yeah, they thought about this months ago, according to reports. So, to come back now to try to make a pitch, I think it's a desperation move by the Big 12, one they should make, obviously, but I don't think it's going to do any good. And think about what has gone on here. Greg Sankey was not only a colleague of Bob Bowlesby, but he was sitting across the table with him for the last 2 years developing the expanded playoff. I think the sense of betrayal on a lot of levels is staggering. I guess we should have learned 10 years ago when, we kind of got a hint of this when Missouri and Nebraska and everybody left the Big 12, and they had their own feelings about Texas. But this topped them all. I mean, if you're talking about 6 months this thing was in play, and even Oklahoma, you almost expected it Texas. I think people agree with that. But Oklahoma stood for something maybe a little bit more, I guess, ethical than this. That's what surprises me.
Dennis Dodd is our guest from CBS. Didn't it feel that Texas always viewed themselves better than the Big 12? Even joining the Big 12 and the Big 8, they always felt like they were better and above.
Yeah, there was a time when, Texas looked down its nose, and they probably still do at the likes of TCU. What are we doing even playing them? They're the little brother here in Texas. They didn't want them in the league because then that would open a door for TCU to be able to recruit better in Texas. And it did, and TCU had its share of success. But if you remember the story, Chris Del Conte, who was the the AD at TCU got a meeting with the Lost Odds, the old AD at Texas, and drove down there and, made this massive presentation. And, when things were really sketchy in the Big 12, they went out for drinks at I think the Four Seasons. By the end of the afternoon, the Lost Odds said, don't worry about it. You're in. We need you. So things changed quickly. But I think those days are over. Chris Del Conte, that's one of the ironies now. Chris Del Conte is leaving the Big 12. He was so desperate to get in. One of the other ironies I think needs to be pointed out, Texas isn't exactly a superpower right now. They are leaving the Big 12 for the SEC to, in essence, improve their recruiting in Texas. Think about that.
Wow. No, that's that is that's a really fascinating sort of view and thing to think about with Texas. Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports is our guest. You mentioned the grant of rights and, maybe having to play in the Big 12 through 2024-25. What would be better for the Big 12? Would it be playing this thing out and year by year collecting the grant of rights, or would it be better just to negotiate this thing and collect, 60, 70 million apiece from the two, go their separate ways and figure out what the future holds before that grant of rights deal is up in 24-25? What would be the better course of action, do you think, for the Big 12?
Well, there are two pieces to this. There is, the penalty for leaving early, which is about $80 million each. Now, that's separate from the grant of rights. The grant of rights would be a legal thing. They would, Texas or Oklahoma or the league would have to come to an agreement that they were going to leave early. So those seem to be two pretty big hurdles. Now, Texas apparently has given up on the Longhorn Network, which tells me they're leaving at least $150 million on the table because this thing is only halfway done. It's only 10 years to the 20-year deal. So that's 150, probably more since it's backloaded. So if they're willing to give up that money, are they just sniffing at $80 million? I don't know. So what I think happens in the end is they come to some sort of settlement where we don't want you here for 4 years, or we don't want to pay $80 million, so what's the number so we can go?
Yep. Visiting with Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports right here on Sports Radio 810 WHB. The next question would be KU and K-State, the local teams, and what remains of the Big 8 schools that would be left behind when Texas and Oklahoma decide to leave. What happens then? I mean, the multiple different options that are there, what are the options you think that are in front of the Big 12, and what do you think they do?
That micro view of it, okay, what's next? The SEC does this. I think that puts the Big Ten immediately on the clock. They've got to react, or not, if they decide not to. But I think clearly they're going to be passed in revenue by the SEC, and as we've seen in the history of these things, that's what spurs this kind of stuff. The Big Ten has an advantage because their contract is up next year in 2022. So they're going to get a bump anyway. But do they want to make a move and hit a home run just like the SEC did? There's a way to do this. There's a way to do it. I don't think it involves Kansas. But there's a way to make Texas and Oklahoma look like child's play. And I've got a story coming out today that kind of details of it, so I'll just leave it at that. But,
interesting.
KU, K-State, don't know. I think KU would be attracted to the Big Ten in some ways. K-State, maybe if the Americans decide to take in some or all of the Big 12 schools. But I do think the likes of K-State and Iowa State you should be concerned because there is no natural fit for them. I don't think Iowa State automatically goes to the Big Ten. Why would Iowa vote for Iowa State to be in it?
Mm-hmm.
They don't bring pro rata, and pro rata is what schools earn in that league. Iowa State is now worth $54 million a year in revenue, which is what Big Ten schools make. But that's a big problem. K-State too. Now I think the Pac-12, if it is of a mind, because they have such small payouts, to go get some of the Big 12 schools and have a mini expansion compared to what Larry Scott did in 2010. So really up in the air right now.
Is there a desire to rush to 16? A decade ago it was like 16-team super conferences, and now that the expansion to 12 with the college football playoff, just because the SEC goes to 16 with Oklahoma and Texas, does it mean there's going to be that same desire, that same appetite for the other conferences to say, well, we got to get to 16 now?
I don't know that. I think there's a larger play here for the SEC because they're not going to necessarily get more money by expanding, at least not now. Their contract goes to 2032.
Mm-hmm.
And why should ESPN, who's trying to manage its money like everybody else, automatically pay those 16 teams more money? I think there's a larger play here. I think this is about control. I think down the line, not right away, the SEC is going to be playing with different rules because they can. The NCAA isn't in control anymore. There's nothing they can do to penalize them. NIL, court ruling, Mark Emmert, capitulating has made it, they're a fly on the wall right now. So it's going to be a thing. This is how the SEC prefers to play, with 16 teams, with this amount of scholarships, with these rules, with these roster sizes. If you want to be with us, that's fine. If you don't want to be with us and play by those rules, then we might get 6 teams in the playoffs. Just for an example. So I think there's a bigger play here than money. Whether everybody, 4 super conferences, I think that's a possibility. If the Big 12 goes away, will they be 16 teams each? I don't know. It could be 16, 20. Maybe the SEC goes to 30.
Visiting with Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports. The Big 12 having the conference call last week, and the commissioners, and the ADs and presidents with the Commissioner Bowlesby pledging allegiance to each other and loyalty and staying together. I'd have to imagine that as soon as the call was done, every school's then figuring out what's best for them and making phone calls to other conferences. This doesn't seem like it's going to be one of those. If you've been through this before, you know that you should be prepared to figure out what's best for you, while to the other 7 teams, you let them know the Big 12 is the first and foremost. It is our number one priority, but also behind the scenes, you've got to be figuring out what's best for yourself.
And your fielding calls as well.
Yeah.
All that's going on. There are desirable teams there. There are teams trying to figure out where they fit. There are teams figuring out what the money's going to be. All the things we just talked about from Texas and Oklahoma. Because let's not forget, after COVID, these athletic budgets aren't exactly operating on, these aren't high times for these budgets. In fact, the moment this was announced, I was told by industry sources that the average value of the contract declined 50 to 75% in the Big 12. So that means the average Big 12 team got $37 million a year. That just went down to $9 million.
Oh, wow.
If it declined 75%. So you're in tremendous upheaval right now.
A couple quick ones for you. Dennis Dodd, CBS Sports. The Pac-12 is going to be talking this week. What do they do? I mean, George Klakoff is on the clock for, less than a month, and this starts happening. Larry Scott's out. What do you think the Pac-12 does now moving forward? Do they look to expand and grab some teams from the Big 12? Do they stand pat? What's their course of action, do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it's a very conservative conference with a rookie commissioner. Larry Scott came in and tried to, turn over the poker table and all the chips and cards, and he almost did it with the play with the Big 12. I frankly don't know where their heads are at. Again, they're a very conservative conference. This is a league that had Urban Meyer sitting there ready to be hired, and I'm talking about USC, and took a pass because of character issues. Well, okay, so where you at? This is a league that once again went off the reservation and hired a commissioner with no college administrative experience. Very good on the internet. He's worked in the entertainment industry and MGM. But I wonder if anybody asked him during the interview, what if college athletics blows up like this?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they even had that thought. So I think the question is for the presidents. Which way do they want to be really aggressive? And if they do they, in the Pac-12, they fancy themselves as very high-minded, an AAU conference, and that's the American Association of Universities, which is a Research One designation. Well, Kansas is that. Iowa State is that. I'm trying to remember who else in the Big 12 is that. And is that a deal breaker? And I guess I don't know the answer to any of those questions. Their best option right now, I think, is to take some of those Big 12 schools and try to match at least the SEC in terms of marketing.
Mm-hmm. Last one for you. If you are throwing a dart and making a guess right now, and maybe it's a fool's errand, an exercise in futility. But where does KU and K-State in 5 years, 6 years? Where are they playing? What conference? What does it look like?
Oh gosh, let's think about next year.
5 months, 5 weeks from now, 5 months from now, 5 years.
NCAA 5 years from now to play in.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll just say this: the last time this happened, KU was down to having to choose between the Big East and the Mountain West. And I would not discount the Mountain West because they have a contract that was a short contract that expires in only 5 years and could really get richer with some of these Big 12 schools. Same with Kansas State. Kansas State, just because they're not, as much as Bill Snyder's done, they're not in the market, we know that, and they're not, quite as big a brand as some of these other schools. But if they do get taken along, they have to hit their knees every night and thank Bill Snyder again because he's made them worthy. So I'll take a pass on that one. I don't know.
I don't know is also an answer too. That's also as telling. Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports. Dennis, you're the man. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to that piece coming out later on this afternoon, later on today. So we'll be looking for that as well. Dennis, great stuff. Thank you so much for the time today.
The Zone with Jason Anderson.
I can't tell you how to make a better souffle, but if you serve me one that tastes like piss, I can tell you this one sucks. Now, I can't tell you to go how to make a better souffle, but I can tell you this one tastes like piss. I don't need a chef's degree. I don't need culinary school to figure that out.
On Sports Radio 810.
I've been the dumbest dumbass all day.
All right, we continue right here on Sports Radio 810 WHB. We'll talk with Alex Duvall coming up at noon. Thank you to Dennis Dodd. He took some time out earlier today to discuss the conference realignment. He's on West Coast time, and when we talked to him at 6 o'clock in the morning, that means he got up really, really early as well. No, we may or may not have talked to him at 6 o'clock in the morning, but we did talk to him. And at the time when we had that discussion, Texas and Oklahoma had yet to notify the Big 12, but he had said, in that conversation that it's going to happen today. At some point, it already happened there right before we came on the air at about 9:45, 9:30, 9:40, something like that, when Texas and Oklahoma sent their official notification to the Big 12 that they are not going to extend their grant of rights media deal after the 24-25 season. So thank you to Dennis Dodd there. It's interesting. He said he's got a piece coming out today at CBS that talks about the Big Ten making a heavyweight play, that the SEC going and getting Texas and Oklahoma, but the Big Ten in what they're talking about right now and what they may or may not be doing, that he's got something coming out that they're going to be making some sort of a heavyweight play. Does that mean Notre Dame?
It smells like Notre Dame.
It smells like Notre Dame to me, but Notre Dame's got the contract where if they join a conference, they have to be in the ACC. All contracts can be negotiated to some degree.
Yes.
How long does that contract go with Notre Dame in the ACC that they have to be a part of the ACC if they were to join a conference, and the Big Ten saying whatever it takes, we are going to get Notre Dame into our conference to put us at 15, and do we add one more team, whether that's West Virginia? And as he said, why would Iowa vote for Iowa State? What does Iowa State bring to the table as another share that you would be splitting up then just to get to 16 for the sake of getting to 16?
The one thing
what
I
other
see,
schools might be there to entice them? And he didn't mention Notre Dame. He just and we'll see when Dennis Dodd drops this report or this piece that he thinks the Big Ten's going to make a power play.
Here's what I think about Iowa and Iowa State. This is just me looking from the outside here. Is they already play. Mm-hmm. They have to play. So that will actually give you another non-conference spot to have a game that you want to play. That's what I see. You'd make it a league game, whatever, and then you can go find yourself. They're really handicapped as far as what sort of non-conference games they can go get because they've got that one already, right? Both Iowa and Iowa State have that one. So that's one less spot they'd have to worry about going and finding a game for them. That's what I would think. But does Iowa want to keep them a little brother? Maybe. I don't know.
Okay, so Dodd just released this a little bit ago, like at 12:20 Eastern. So 6 minutes ago is what he put out there. Says look for the Big Ten to make some moves quickly and TV networks to have their say. He writes here, two iconic programs in the Big 12 heading off to the SEC on the field as that fit in the SEC. Talks about that. chance to change everything. Again, discussing the SEC, still discussing the SEC. Name, image, likeness, Miami booster, as much as anything. SEC, autonomous conference means more for super conference, continue to progress. It's already been a de facto breakaway. Big Ten is on the clock. With Texas and Oklahoma on board, the SEC will at least have the potential to pass the Big Ten as the number one revenue conference that almost compels the Big Ten to act. Its teams earn more than $50 million per year between TV rights, Big Ten network money, bowl payouts, and NCAA tournament revenues. Media rights contracts expire next year. So even without adding teams, the Big Ten and its members are due for a windfall. But which teams out there add pro rata? In other words, which teams are worth proportional value of $50 million plus per year? The biggest remaining chips on the realignment board are Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, and USC. The Buckeyes and Wolverines aren't going anywhere. Notre Dame has shown no indication of assimilating into the ACC permanently after playing there in 2020 due to the COVID-19. It's conceivable the big cigars at USC, tired of the underachieving Pac-12, could be interested in joining the Big Ten. Wow. Would give the Trojans better access to the playoff. Such a move would probably involve getting travel partners, Washington, Colorado, Big Ten, UCLA, Oregon. Says don't sweat the travel. Geography ceased to matter in realignment a long time ago. That's the next potential blockbuster, at least comparable to what the SEC just did. A Big Ten with conceivably 7 of the top 16 TV markets in the country stretching coast to coast. Says before all this
I'll disagree
occurred,
a little bit. I think
Rutgers-
travel does matter.
Yeah.
I mean, Dennis and I can agree to disagree on that a little bit. It's not the biggest thing in the
Yeah.
world, but it's something. I mean, these guys don't want to just pour money away.
So he writes here, would Kansas be on the Big Ten short list? Believe it or not, football remains the primary revenue driver at KU. Its languishing football program might be a plus in realignment. Big Ten football is strong enough to absorb a team that would be an automatic W, despite it subtracting from overall schedule strength. It would be a no-brainer because the Jayhawks basketball is a historically great program. That comes from Dennis Dodd. And, by the way, the Big Ten, whether we scoff at it or laugh or think that it's all just for show, the Big Ten does have that feel of, not even that feel, they have the reputation in what they won are AAU schools. Our schools, then Kansas is a part of that,
Right.
is an AAU school. So that matters. Whether people thought it was real or not, some of the reasoning behind Missouri to the SEC was that Missouri was an AAU school, and the SEC was like, well, we
One of the
can
few.
at least try to increase the academics here. They're not bringing much out of St. Louis, but we got Vandy, and everybody makes fun of our academics, so maybe we can add them
And
as
Nebraska
well.
was an AAU school when they
Yep.
when they went to the Big Ten.
Then he writes here, the Pac-12 is now in the hole, as in, best up or next up. If the Big Ten is next, Pac-12 is next up after that. So what would they do at that point? So, I mean,
Here's what I think about Southern Cal.
The power play of USC is thinking outside the box.
It's way outside the box.
I will say that. It's something I had not heard before. Is that something that Dennis Dodd is hearing from the Big Ten, or is that something that Dennis Dodd is throwing out there? It would be surprising if Dodd just said, you know what about USC to the Big Ten? Let me write about this, because I don't know many people that would even think about the left coast joining the Big Ten and spanning coast to coast with the Big Ten network. I'd have to imagine that is at least something that has been brought up among some sources and people he's talked to.
Perhaps. It just doesn't make sense to me. I know Southern Cal's a big deal, but dude, time zones are a big deal.
Yeah.
Ask anyone if they
USC
if they
traveling
watch,
to Rutgers to
if
play?
they watch Mike Trout play baseball around. No, they don't, because it happens late at night. And they can't, okay, let's say you have the 11 o'clock starts our time, which are noon in part of Big 12 or Big 10 country. That means Southern Cal's never going to be on that. Even when on the road, you're going to say that, all right, they always have to be on later. I just don't see it. I don't see it. But
says,
who knows? Hey, I didn't see a lot of these things happening.
Right, I didn't either. It says Delaney brilliantly signed a short-term 6-year TV deal that expires in 2022 with the Big Ten standing as the next major conference to renegotiate. Will it sign a mini extension to 2025, allowing its deal to sync up with those in the Big 12 if it wants to go after Kansas and or Iowa State?
And as we said before,
Or will it take a giant swing and look west?
maybe CBS will want to get involved in some way with the Big Ten because they're going to be out of the SEC soon enough. I don't know. As we've said a lot of times about television, network television, because there are parts of this that are, if you're sitting there watching the Olympics now, the Olympics are on NBC, but they're also on Peacock. They're on the streaming stuff, and that's what's going to happen with college football, college basketball. We've already trying to get used to the fact that some games are on streaming things and not on regular TV. But as far as network television goes, the one thing that really works is sports. That works. The NFL doesn't want all their games on streaming stuff. The NFL wants their games on NBC, on Sunday Night Football. They want them on CBS and Fox, and they've got their deal with ESPN. But generally what happens with ESPN, on Monday Night Football, if the game is on in Kansas City, someone locally will pay some money to have that game on network TV. There's not a Chiefs game, if you live in Kansas City, that you can't watch with rabbit ears. That's the way it works, okay? And then, so they want to keep their feet in both lanes there. They want to be able to have network television because sports works for that. Network TV shows aren't what they used to be. Now that a lot of stuff's going to Netflix, But the one thing that works is live sports on that. So they'll the Big Ten shrewdly, I guess, if Dennis uses those words, they're up soon. That's good. Will that be a place for CBS to come knocking and get in a bidding war with someone else? CBS didn't have enough stomach to take the SEC again, which has been their one big property. They do well. Those games do well on that 2:30 game. It does really well ratings wise. But the thing, if you look, I've looked at a lot of TV ratings over the past 5, 6, 7 days on this. What you constantly see is Ohio State's a machine. Okay, they get watched because Ohio State, they have 50,000 people that go to school there. They have more like living alums than anyone else. They do great, but Michigan's kind of the same way. But the rest of it's not always like that in the Big Ten. But is that enough for CBS to want to say, yeah, or to Fox say, yeah, we're going to keep CBS out of this. We want to keep doing this because they have them on there. I don't know. TV's going to run all of it.
Yeah, the thing that he brought up there, which was, eye-opening and was a number that I think would hit like a sledgehammer to Big 12 fans and certainly the area, that says that ESPN and Fox contains language that allows the Big 12 networks to reduce payouts if there is a loss of membership. And what he was told is that Oklahoma and Texas could be anywhere from 50 to 75% of the value in the Big 12. He said that there's a chance, in talking with him there, that right now the payout is $37 million, could drop to $9 million without Oklahoma and Texas. That would be 25%. That would be losing 75%. If it's at the high end of what is at least some industry executives saying that that's the value they bring in TV
probably
networks.
Probably going to be cut in half. Even a good side would be cut in
right,
half.
so you're looking at 18? $18.5 million per school instead of $37 million. And to that degree, if there was a chance of the Big Ten making a play at USC, then it would behoove the Pac-12 to be aggressive and say, let's grab 4 teams from the Big 12. And then those Big 12 teams, those 4 that they may grab to go to 16, say, peace out, Big 12. Sorry, but we're out of here. We're not going to sit around and have, say $9 million, half our money, 60, 70% gone, 30% of our money.
You talk about pro rata. What will those teams be worth to the Pac-12?
To the Pac-12.
Don't know. If the Big 12 language is that they're only worth this, then that's not going to be worth it because the Pac-12's payouts are not great right now.
No.
They're not what the others are.
No. I mean, just Texas Tech and Oklahoma State would get you into Oklahoma, get you into Texas.
It's not the part of Texas they want to be a part of.
Right. Absolutely.
It's not Dallas.
Yes.
It's not Houston.
They're not bringing Baylor into the Pac-12, so that eliminates
I was
Baylor.
Super surprised. Not surprised. Baylor has had some issues. Their numbers of people watching them on TV are atrocious because it's just such a small alumni ship. And they were pretty good, right? I mean, a couple of years ago, they were in the Big 12 championship game. They just don't have many people. They're not a brand nationally. Even though they were really good for a while with Art Briles, and they got better with Matt Rule. That's not a brand that people want to sit there and watch.
And the Pac-12 is said, and they, people around there say they want to continue to not be connected with any religious institutions. It's one of the reasons why BYU is never joining the Pac-12, and one of the reasons why Baylor won't get an invite from the Pac-12 to join the Pac-12, and so that would eliminate Baylor. So you would have 7 teams left over at that point, and I'm not sure the Pac-12 would extend an invite to West Virginia. So that would leave 6 teams left over at that point. Texas Tech and Oklahoma State, I assume, would be the first two. So that would leave 5 teams for 2 slots.
We've already seen these things get divided up.
Kansas State.
For a long time, we thought, KU and K-State were kind of connected. Oklahoma State were connected.
Right.
But
that's not the case.
No, it's not the case.
It's every man for themselves. It's every school for themselves.
And as much as legislators in these states try to get around it, it doesn't seem like that's going to do anything.
Barry Trammell, we had him on last week, and he said there's no way the legislators will block Oklahoma from going to the SEC. So they will be split. And he's like, Oklahoma's going to the SEC, and Oklahoma State will figure out where they are going to end up. But the legislators will not block Oklahoma from going there, even if it means splitting Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. They will try to do what they can to make sure those 2 teams play, but they're not going to stop Oklahoma from going to a different conference. And the question would be, does Kansas do the same thing? Let's say KU is offered the Big Ten, and K-State's like, hey, what about us? Or K-State's offered the Pac-12, and KU's like, whoa, where's our landing spot? I don't know what's going on. KU at least has the national brand of KU in basketball that will bring something to the table. Even if you're talking about the Pac-12 and saying we're bringing in, we're expanding for football, but we're also bringing in a pretty good basketball brand. And by the way, getting Kansas in the Pac-12 for basketball means you increase the ratings for Kentucky fans, Duke fans, Louisville fans, Michigan State, because they'll be watching Kansas. They'll be watching UCLA this year, those big-time fans, to see, one of the best teams. Gonzaga, I don't know how many people watch Gonzaga. There's always the looking at Gonzaga being below you when it comes to teams like Duke and Kentucky and North Carolina.
10:30 at night.
And they're on at 10:30 at night. Would Kansas playing out there at that time be something to where college basketball diehards in some of those areas would view a little bit more, and you get the brand there? And it's an interesting point that Dodd brought up in the Big Ten, that the lack of football might actually be a plus because you're not bringing in a school that other teams are like, whoa, now we got to deal with them too in football. Whereas there are teams in the SEC, Missouri being one of them, probably both Mississippi schools, that are going, now we're bringing in Texas and Oklahoma.
And they're kind of on our side of the game over here.
Yeah, so are we realigning everything when it comes to these divisions? Are we moving things around? Are we going to go now geographic when it comes to East and West as opposed to, the way that...
Sort of geographic?
Yeah, Missouri's in the East, but they are the westernmost, SEC school.
The SEC is going to have to... There's going to be a lot of things that have to change. If they're going to do this, and it seems like they are, they're going to have to probably go to pods, 14 pods.
I like the 14 for different pods,
and they're going to probably have to do it. Okay, I'll ask you. You've been in the SEC for 10 years.
I have, yes, SEC veteran.
So, what are the crossover rivalries?
It is. Let's see. It's Missouri and Arkansas
for the last half of the 10 years.
Okay.
Before that, it was Missouri and A&M right at the beginning.
Right.
So,
yes. Right.
So this tradition-rich Missouri-Arkansas has been for a while.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's A&M and...
I think they put them with South Carolina.
I think it's South Carolina, but I don't know for a fact it's
Here's
South
the
Carolina.
deal. We know this. It's about 3 of them that people care about.
Yeah.
And Tennessee is an idiot for wanting to keep their third Saturday of October with Alabama. They need to beg out of it. And they'd be happy to beg out of it at this point, I think. Georgia and Auburn is called the oldest rivalry in the South.
Yep.
That's one of them. And then LSU, Florida.
LSU,
and other than
Florida's
that, I don't think people know. Who is Vandy's crossover rival?
Is it?
Exactly. Who is Mississippi's crossover rival?
I think they might be together. I think it might be Vandy and Ole Miss.
That's
because Mississippi State is Kentucky.
We'll be able to,
like anybody. Everybody knows Kentucky, Mississippi State, the crossover rival.
Always been the one. So if they want to do this right, if they want to keep those, let me give you this 4-team deal. If you want to keep Georgia and Auburn, because you have to, right? And they got to keep Florida and Georgia because it's the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. I don't really want to know, Shane. The example is no one knows. So I don't want to know.
I now want to know what Vandy's is. Is it Vandy Ole Miss?
Yes.
Okay,
so it's horrible.
So by process of elimination, we went through every single one of them. It was like, well, now we got Vandy and Ole Miss left over. They must be the crossover rival.
The Iron Bowl has to stay. Okay? That has to stay.
Who's Texas A&M's? Is it South Carolina?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So Iron Bowl stays.
It has to stay. World's largest outdoor cocktail party.
Cocktail party stays.
One of the great
rivalry
in the South. So I'm going to give you this 14 pod and see if they'll go for this because they won't. But I think they. How about this pod that is Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Georgia?
Love it.
Okay, they're not going to do that.
Done. Take it.
They're not going to do it because they don't want that.
I like the idea of Mississippi State, Kentucky, Vandy, and Missouri.
That's probably not going to happen either.
I like that idea.
I think what could happen, because I think A&M is going to get a little bone thrown to them. They're ticked about this thing, so they're probably going to not put Texas and Texas A&M in a 14 pod.
Oh, they should.
I think they should, but they won't.
Should.
So, but I wouldn't mind. They will put Texas and Oklahoma in a pod together.
God, what if they put Texas, Oklahoma, A&M, and Missouri in a pod and say, here's the Big 12 pod is over there?
I actually think what would be better to give A&M their little piece of blood or whatever. I think Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Missouri would be a great pod.
It's a terrible pod.
That's a Southwest Conference.
Sounds like an awful pod.
It's a big 8.
Sounds like an awful
together.
pod.
And then you put
It's a dumb pod.
A&M with LSU, Mississippi, and Mississippi State as a pod.
No, I think you switch A&M and Missouri.
You want to be in that pod? But
I don't want to deal with LSU every year, but I'm done dealing with freaking Oklahoma and Texas every year, all right?
Listen, you beat Oklahoma and Texas. Last time you all played Texas, you won, didn't you?
Yeah, there's such a rich history of Missouri beating Oklahoma in big games. Such a rich history there.
Listen, they beat them in 2010.
And it's been nice for the last decade not having to care whatever Texas does.
It's been wonderful.
Whatever Texas does.
I think what they'll end up doing is I think they'll keep Florida and Georgia in a pod.
They have to.
And then they'll put them with South Carolina and Kentucky or something like that over there. I think that's probably what they'll do. But the right pod would be you got to keep the oldest rivalry in the South, and you got to keep the Iron Bowl, and you got to keep the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Put all those 4 in one pod. They won't go for that.
Well, then the question would be, though, if they've got those 4 pods, the 3 that's left over, you would play 9 games. So you'd play the 3 teams in your pod, and then 2 teams
and that's
of that to get you to 9. But is there one specific that you would play in another pod?
No. I say it's out. You don't. You got to say bye-bye to the Vanderbilt Mississippi State game.
No, Vanderbilt Ole Miss.
Ole Miss. See, I forgot what it was already.
You can't say bye-bye to that. That's one of the
You got to say goodbye to
best
Alabama,
traditions.
Tennessee, whatever. You got to say bye-bye to those things. Okay? They just got to go.
I think LSU would be fine with saying bye-bye to their cross-division rival. Yeah, I think Florida would be fine with every year.
I think they like that game, okay? But these things go in cycles. Sometimes that's good for someone. Sometimes it's bad for someone.
They don't like that game when you've got other schools that are like, really, that's their cross division rival.
Yeah.
Like Missouri's is Arkansas right now. Really, we got to play LSU.
Yeah.
We got to play Auburn. Like, really, that's what we're dealing with here. And that team plays Arkansas.
You know what?
That team plays Mississippi State. Really?
Tennessee liked having Alabama.
Yeah.
When it was Mike DeBose and Dennis Francione.
Right.
And Tennessee had 17 pros on their team.
We like Alabama
they don't like
when it's
it now.
Shula.
I went to that game once in Talladega or in Tuscaloosa. You know who won? Tennessee.
Yeah.
Beat their butt. And then we went to a race. We went Ricky Bobby. We went to Talladega.
Yes.
Went to the NASCAR race. So I've watched that game happen when Tennessee was good and Alabama wasn't, and they thought it was really cool then. And they don't think it's very cool now.
No.
Okay?
Because
but
they're not very cool
They
anymore.
keep wanting to keep it. But Tennessee needs to know their role and say, Phil Fulmer's gone. Peyton Manning's gone. It ain't happening right now. Let's say goodbye to Alabama and say, let's play Vandy, Kentucky, and South Carolina or something in our pod.
They absolutely should say bye-bye to Alabama. I mean, there's no reason to, because I don't know that anybody really says, "Oh, that Tennessee-Alabama game. Oh, let me get fired up for that."
They used to 20 years ago. They used to.
A long time ago.
They don't
but
do it anymore.
Not anymore. I mean, Tennessee has not been good
and I honestly
for a while.
don't think most people around here. I know a lot of these things because I've gone to these things and I like it. But people probably don't know that Georgia and Auburn is a crossover game. They might. Right? Mm-hmm. And they might know that LSU and Florida were or whatever.
I doubt that people really know those crossover rivals.
They know the divisional rivals more because they play them more often. Alabama, LSU, they're used to that being a big game. Used
Iron
to
Bowl,
Auburn, Alabama.
Georgia, Florida.
Things like that.
Yeah.
But if they do this right, they'll say we're having 12 games. They'll do 14 pods. You will play your 3, like you said. You'll play 2 of the others. And then you will play everybody in 4 years. Mm-hmm. Twice. Your place, their place. Just like I love the 12 teams.
Best 2 records play for the SEC championship?
Well, maybe you'll have to have a
Can't
mini
be
playoff.
In the same pod?
Maybe all 4 will make it. You'll have a little mini playoff of your own.
Semifinal.
How much would that be worth? One on campus, one on the other.
And then you go into a 16-team playoff eventually?
If you're really bailing on all this crap.
21-game season.
And
for
there's
some of
no
these
more
teams.
humanitarian bowls and all that garbage, whatever. If you're really upsetting the whole apple cart, maybe you'll do that.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll say December 5th, we play, let's say, it's a fantasy world. So let's say Texas wins their pod.
Oh, total fantasy then.
And then Alabama wins their pod.
Does that make them back?
Oh, they've always been back. Yeah. But, you could rotate those through and you could say every 4 years, let's call them, don't call them East, West, whatever. You say 1, 2, 3, 4. You say 1 plays 4, 2 plays 3, da da da. Or maybe you do records, maybe something. I don't know. And then they would have a Final Four. They would do great. I mean, if they had, and those were on site or something, and then you have the title game, it would be freaking outstanding. But because I think we're done caring about finals, right? We don't care about that anymore. We just went through last year playing, regular games deep into December. We're done with that. I think we should say bye-bye to a lot of these bowls.
Agreed.
Whatever, and then have the 12-team playoff is going to go into February or something. It's not going to be wrapped up. It just is. And who cares? I mean, just give us more good football. That's all I've ever wanted. That's why if they do this, they need to play 9 games. I don't want to watch the Citadel play at Alabama.
If they expand to Texas and Oklahoma, they bring them in, which they will. Then you're going to have to examine and actually go to 9 games. It'd be absurd if you stayed with 8 because then you're not really in a conference because you're talking about playing a team once every 8 years. Mm-hmm. 9 years.
Going to a place every 16 years.
Every 16 years playing at Alabama.
Place.
Of the cross division if
now,
it's in the other
my
division.
thought is this: we haven't seen anything real good about this yet, but if they've been talking for 6+ months about this, they got a bunch of scenarios out there. I'm surprised they're not out there by any. Everyone's just guessing now. They're putting I just did with you.
Before Missouri got in the SEC, they had accidentally released a 13-team schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, so they had already planned for 13 teams before Missouri got there. I mean, they were going to move forward with 13. I mean, they had a conference schedule with 13 teams and divisions and everything that accidentally got leaked.
Right.
And I think one of the stories that I read maybe a couple of years ago,
they're doing a much better job
was
keeping
that
this in
A&M
now.
still has like a copy of the 13-team schedule and everything before Missouri got in. And then, of course, they accidentally leaked the website that welcomed Missouri into the SEC.
Right.
That was on a domain that wasn't public yet, but accidentally was made public. And everybody went there was like, I kind of feel like they're going to join the SEC here. So, I mean, they've got all these scenarios and different things down right now to try to figure out, what they're ultimately going to do
and what year it's going to be. Because as we always joke, we joke about these contracts schools have with each other. In 2027, we're playing so-and-so, right? Mm-hmm. Well, those things are going to get messed up now, too. They probably all have things written in them now that says, unless conference realignment happens, maybe we're going to beg out of this game, So, because Oklahoma is supposed to play in the next 10 years, Tennessee, Alabama, and LSU, I think. So those will cease to be non-conference contracts. Those will go away, right? So they'll have to fill something else in. I mean, everything is able to be torn up and figured out.
Well, I think also, we talked about Texas, blaming recruiting and one of the reasons why they want to go to the SEC, which, by the way, is your own backyard if you could assess talent and bring those players in as opposed to everybody else coming in and grabbing talent from your school that
you think saying Patrick Mahomes could be a nice safety for you is not great?
Would have been nice. Johnny Manziel as a safety would have also played really well. I mean, he was a good quarterback at A&M, but imagine him as a safety at Texas. That would have been awesome. So, yeah, you can talk about that all you want. I do think, I brought this up last week when it comes to Oklahoma, that Oklahoma can win the Big 12. And then when they get into the college football playoff, they're 0-4. 3 of those have been by a decent margin. 1 has been a really wide margin. 1 was a double overtime loss to Georgia, but still 0-4. So what's Oklahoma missing? If you're saying they're missing some of the players from the Southeast, because I went back and looked the last 4 recruiting classes for Oklahoma, 80 players, 11 of them from an SEC footprint outside of Missouri, right? And outside of Missouri and Texas. Okay, so Texas is technically an SEC footprint with A&M, but they've always recruited in Texas. So an SEC footprint, those other schools, you're talking about 11 total players in 4 years. Whereas now, if there's a player that's deciding between, well, you know what, Mississippi State and Oklahoma. Oklahoma's in the Big 12. I want to play in the SEC. My parents come and watch me play. You know what? Now Oklahoma's in the SEC. Now I can go to Oklahoma, play in the SEC. And, does that increase then Oklahoma's overall recruiting in the Southeast?
I think
and their
they
brand?
feel it would.
Yeah, and now they feel like they can compete with the teams in the SEC, even in their own conference, whereas maybe they couldn't compete with them in a different conference when they were in the actual playoff.
Right, because when they're in they've done well in the regular season games against the SEC, and they've done well in the unimportant bowl games.
Yeah.
I mean, they beat Florida, they beat Auburn, they've done those things. So they've done okay in those games.
Clemson, LSU, Georgia, and who was the other?
They lost to Alabama.
Alabama.
Yeah.
So one of them was the ACC, but Clemson's like an SEC school.
But they're in the ACC.
Yeah.
But
they get the studs.
They beat Auburn in a bowl game, and they beat Florida in a bowl game. So they've done that, and they've played home and home with Tennessee, and we said Tennessee's not great, whatever, but they played home and home with them, and they beat them both games. So they've been kind of okay there, but I think I know they feel what they want to do defensively for sure is to get bigger and stronger, and the way to do that is to go head to head with the SEC, and they're doing better this last year or so of doing that. And then if they're actually in the SEC, I think they feel with what they have right now, with Lincoln Riley as the head coach, Alex Grinch as the defensive coordinator, and they will be able to do that. The brand is the brand. It's as good as anyone in the country. And if you're putting them in a 10-team pod, they are definitely a great brand as far as that goes. And I think they feel like if they can recruit SEC country as well as Big 12 and all that stuff, they'll be great. That they'll be able to do it. Then, listen, you're not going to beat them all. I mean, Alabama doesn't win every title.
No.
They win most of them, but they don't win all of them.
Just 6 in 12 years.
And they've got more than everyone else. They have all the players.
Yeah.
They have more NFL players than everyone else.
By the way, also, Saban ain't going to live forever. No. He might, but he's not going to live forever. And people that want to act like, well, it's Alabama. Saban's awesome, but he's at Alabama too. Look at Alabama before Saban. There's a reason they went and got Saban.
I watched them lose to Tennessee.
Yeah. Saban ain't losing to Tennessee. We'll take a timeout. We'll come back. We'll wrap up this hour. Alex Duvall is our guest coming up at noon, Royals Farm Report. Looking forward to that conversation, talking about, the Adam Frazier trade for one thing, and then also the Royals did sign all 21 of their draft picks as well, so that maybe that changed the view and assessment of the Royals draft since they got 21 for 21 signed. More Zone next. All right, we'll talk with Alex Duvall from Royals Farm Report coming up at noon. We'll talk some Royals baseball. We'll get into some Chiefs as well. We haven't got into the Adam Frazier trade as of yet, which I definitely want to get into because fascinated by that. It gives us a nice barometer, a nice gauge for Whit Merrifield, what to go off of. I think it's the floor, but I don't necessarily think it's the floor based on the comparison with the two players. I think Whit Merrifield has a better track record overall, but Frazier is having a much better season this year. But it's a matter of...
And where's Frazier going?
The Padres. But it's a matter of
running
motivation,
out of places
too.
For people to play out there.
Yeah, that's right. It's a motivation, too. Like the Pirates felt like they needed to... Yeah, maybe. The Pirates felt like they needed to trade Frazier.
Get something for him.
Whereas the Royals don't necessarily need to trade Whit Merrifield. So are you going to be blown away to really get Whit? And also with Frazier now being off the market, the teams that might be looking for a second baseman outfielder, does that then increase the price for Whit Merrifield? We'll see. We'll talk to Alex Duvall about that and a number of other things in the prospects next.